Aloha! I'm Eric Anderson, pastor of Church of the Holy Cross, United Church of Christ in Hilo, Hawaii, and here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking about the 8th chapter of Paul's letter to the Romans. Unlike most of the other letters of Paul, which have survived to become part of our New Testament, the letter to the Romans was sent to people that Paul had not yet met. Some of them he clearly had heard about. He clearly expected that they had heard about him. He planned to visit Rome on his way to Spain, so he wrote a letter to introduce himself and to ask for their help and support as he planned that great journey. As a result, the letter to the Romans is more expansive than some of Paul's other correspondence. Paul had more to say about the extent of his thinking and his theology. In his letters to the churches in Corinth and in Galatia, Paul focused more on specific concerns arising within those congregations. In his letter to the Romans, he was trying to describe who he was and how he thought and what he believed about Jesus. And so we have not just the longest of Paul's letters, we have the one in which he had the most to say. This section of the 8th chapter is just packed with Paul's thinking about salvation and about God's role, not just in creation, but in the extent of God's love for creation. If God is for us, who can be against us? The God, Paul said, that sent Jesus, the God who was willing to sacrifice Jesus, the God who was willing to let the human beings do what they wanted to Jesus, is a God who will respond with grace and with mercy. In Paul's thinking, no power on earth could step between God's mercy and those to whom God chose to provide it. Paul called them God's elect. And indeed, that's true, those whom God has chosen. I do wonder if we can assume that God chose a small number. Paul worked diligently to increase that number. But if God sent God's Son into the world, not to condemn the world, but so that the world might be saved through him, as John, the gospel writer, later put it, well then, how much of the world did God intend to save? And if there are no powers that can stand between God and God's mercy, how many people will God preserve at the end of time? I do think that I can't entirely remove the possibility of condemnation for some. Between the freedom of God and the ability of human beings to make pretty catastrophic mistakes, I think that possibility is always there. I also think that God's intent was, is, and will always be to welcome all humanity into that place of light and beauty and love that God has prepared. Jesus said, "In my Father's house there are many mansions, and I go to prepare a place for you." How many mansions have been prepared for us and for those we know and for those we do not know? The answer to that question lies in the gracious heart of God. That's what I'm thinking. I'm curious to hear what you're thinking. Send me an email or leave me your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. From Church of the Holy Cross UCC in Hilo, Hawaii, that's what I'm thinking.